The America First Legal Foundation combating the left's radical agenda.
Fight for the American people, defend the Constitution, and save this nation for the next generation. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of The Arena with America First Legal. Today, joining me here in studio are three of my favorite colleagues. They're all my favorites, just like your kids. You can't name one who's the favorite, but these are three of my favorite. So to my left is Alexa Vance, to her left is Dan Epstein, and to his left is Julie Strauss. Today, you're going to hear from us. We're going to switch up our format from week to week. Some weeks we'll have special guests. Some weeks it'll be our team diving into different issues, current events, and the like. And so today is the first episode where you're going to hear a lot just straight from us, straight from the heart. You might feel as though you're in one of our internal meetings. We'll see. Those tend to be a little more free-flowing and fun and comedic in nature than you might imagine. But let's just get right into today's episode. So, y'all ready?
Yeah.
Ready to go? Cool. So I want to start talking about what happened over the weekend at the Washington Hilton, which seems to be a cursed venue these days, quite frankly, over the last several decades. What do you think it is that leads to somebody who is an educated, by all regards, high-performing individual in society to go and try to do the thing that he's alleged in federal charging documents is having engaged in over the weekend, trying to go in and kill as many people from the Trump administration as he can, trying to do as much harm, barging through the Secret Service checkpoint, heavily armed. DOJ has released pictures from him recently that show taking a selfie in the mirror of the way, how he was situated, the equipment that was on him. What would possess somebody to do something like that in the year 2026?
Well, all you have to do is turn on the news day in and day out. And there is such a beating of the drum about how bad our president is, that he's Hitlerian, that he's a tyrant, this, whether it's the minority leader, Hakeem Jeffries, or Schumer, anybody, the media. If you hear long enough, day in and day out, this kind of language, and you are somebody educated, like this is not a guy who, was on the streets, a drug addict. It's a man who's educated, who was involved in some sort of competition to make a special kind of wheelchair. I mean, we're talking somebody whose manifesto that I'm not sure if you all read, it was very clear, very lucid, and he felt that he was doing the right thing by taking out this horrible president. In his word, not exactly his words, but his description of the president, I wouldn't even mention here because it's so untrue and it's such an insult. But the point being is every single day, it's not only allowed, but it's encouraged by every member of society on the, quote, other side. And eventually, it creates this hero image in people. Like, I need to come forward and fix this for the American people. We need to take this guy out and anybody else who's in his way.
There's an entire segment of society that now believes that political violence is acceptable. I mean, there was a poll done recently, and it was staggering to see people on the left and on the right, but a lot of people on the left believed that it's okay if if Trump is, they truly believe, I think, that Trump is Hitler, that Trump is a fascist, all these things that are not true. But it's because the media has created this echo chamber where society is just being fed these lies, and then these people are being radicalized to go out and commit these horrific acts. I mean, it's sad.
So irresponsible.
Yeah, so
It's really irresponsible.
I'm very much personally in favor of as much speech as we can possibly get it. When we were on with Mike Benz, we talked about the importance of it and, not having censors who prevent you from getting a message across. But there's also a difference between freedom to speak and freedom to espouse a message and having consequences, right, for the message that you actually say, for the words that you speak. And I think that fundamentally as a society, we've forgotten about that distinction, which is you're not allowed to just say, well, you can say, you should be able to say as much as you possibly can without the government interfering with your ability to get your message across. But there may be legal liabilities and there may be legal consequences that attach to the words that come out of your mouth for the things that you post. It has been that way under the common law for centuries now. And so I guess in my mind, it brings up the question, and Dan, maybe you have thoughts on this, but I mean, do you think, and I have my own answer and my own thoughts about this, but do you think New York Times versus Sullivan plays a role in not allowing there to be some kind of a counterpoint, some kind of a consequence to people who engage in speech that if it against a public figure or public figures generally speaking, that if it was said about some member of the general public would attach some kind of legal liability in terms of monetary damages?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really the question we're seeing with, President Trump is obviously going after, we saw him go after ABC News. We saw him go after CBS 60 Minutes, which was a complete fraud. You're seeing him go after the New York Times now, going after BBC, where, it's pretty clear that reporters now think that they can outright lie and, express things as fact, and that they will be shielded by New York Times versus Sullivan. And I think we're seeing even constitutional law scholars like Alan Dershowitz saying we need to consider New York Times versus Sullivan. It is just allowing too much of defamation without any consequence. And I think that it's not good for political figures who are kind of drowned out by attacks that, to the American public seem justified and can even radicalize some people. But it's also just bad news. It's bad reporting. It's bad for informing the American public. And that's actually why in 2024, I think a lot of people of the left, my, mother included, who was a social work professor, I mean, how do you get more far left than that, voted for Trump because she said what's happening with the New York Times and these major mainstream papers is they're just not credible anymore. And I think, we have to, think about, what are we doing in terms of informing the American public?
Well, and you're encouraging this corruption, if you will, of the civil society, right? Like anything goes now. The ends justify the means.
Yeah.
For people who they're on a mission, and the mission is destruction. And you can say anything. When we were growing up, sticks and stones shall break my bones, but words will never hurt me. False. Look at what's happened today. It has gone to such an extreme that you have the minority leader calling Caroline Leavitt a so-called press secretary, calling her a liar. I mean, anything goes. And when anything goes and there's no standards, then it's okay to do this kind of behavior, to engage in this kind of danger to society.
Well, and it's interesting, Gene, you bring up New York Times versus Sullivan and thinking about the constitutional law of free speech. When we think about kind of incitement of violence, typically it is you're immune and protected on the First Amendment for viewpoints. I think what's happening now with the left is there's a acceptable viewpoint and then there's an unacceptable viewpoint. And the view is if you espouse a, America First, MAGA viewpoint, violence is the only justification for response. We don't need more speech. We don't need engagement. It is violence, because what you are now in advocating America First is you are a racist. You are a potential terrorist. You are everything that we hate. And we're not going to respond because we know ideas aren't going to respond to it, because you might have real ideas there, some truth that you speak. It only could be violence, and that's the only way we can silence you.
And I think what you said is so true. It's like they believe that the ends justify the means. And it's like, because they view everything as bad that Trump or that the right or, whatever you want to call it is doing, they think that, okay, we just have to destroy them. That's all we can do. And
Right.
it's crazy.
And to your point, what they're teaching or they're not teaching in school now, like American history, sense of pride, sense of Americanism. You think they're getting this in school? No, they're getting everything that you said. We're bad, we're colonizers, we're oppressors, on and on and on. So when you have this perfect storm, it is so easy, as horrific as it is to see what happened Saturday night. I don't think any of us are surprised. It's horrible, but it's not, it's not like this was this huge leap to get to this point, right?
Yeah. I mean, the other thing about it is that with this rhetoric and some of their messaging, which again, in this country, fine, you can make different messages. Not all messages. There are criminal penalties attached to certain types of speech, like threats, threats to kill people, not protected speech. You will incur criminal penalties if you engage in that type of speech. But the thing is that it's, you sit here and you think, what is it that possesses somebody at their core to just even engage in this? And I guess it really does come down to this thought that, you are of the other. You are of this other thing that is evil. And so if any harm falls on you and I don't directly cause it, I don't pull the trigger, then there's no problem. Like we're good to go. And so they'll engage in this type of thing almost complicitly, knowing that somebody out there who's unstable or who's crazy or who just has enough of a savior complex, that they're going to go engage in some kind of radical violent activity. I mean, that's really, it's really kind of a scary place to be, because what's going to happen is something bad's going to happen. Someone's going to get shot at again. Someone's going to die again. And all they're going to do is they're going to wipe their hands and say, "Oh, I condemn violence in all its forms. No one should die for their beliefs, but they were really an evil person." It seems very cyclical. So it's kind of a sorry state of affairs. And quite frankly, it's a little disturbing from my standpoint.
So imagine, we mentioned the press, and the press, I think, is complicit in all this. They certainly are almost gleeful when bad stuff is said about the president. Imagine if they actually reported, if they actually had some self-awareness, some self-check, some caring about right and wrong, and just objectively reporting. Do you think we'd be anywhere where we are now in terms of the decline?
No. And I think the consequences of that are clear. And it's not just this culture of violence and accepting violence and all of this crazy rhetoric. And, Hakeem Jeffries calling for, warfare against the current administration. Like, he's the top Democrat in the House, and that's crazy. But I think you're seeing people turn away from mainstream media because they don't trust what they're being fed, rightfully so. And so that's why you have all these people seeking out alternative news sources like podcasts. AFL.
Perfect.
Well,
But then you also have TikTok, which is some others.
So wasn't it the case I don't know, I guess I'm dating myself a little bit. It wasn't that long ago, but wasn't there a situation, trying to think back to like 2008 or so, somewhere around there, Sarah Palin, some people had come up with some kind of an ad for Sarah Palin targeting certain districts across the country. And the people who generated the ad had some kind of a bullseye target on different parts of the country. And that turned into this huge scandal that they used to try to personally destroy her, completely destroy her, and say that she was at fault for any kind of violence that would fall as a result of that occurring. Now, look, it's 2026. So doing my lawyer math, that was 18 years ago. It wasn't that long ago, quite frankly. The left was up in arms about this and saying it was this national scandal and innocent people were going to die. And yet today, in the year 2026, it seems like all that I hear from a lot of people on the left, from the Democratic Party especially, there's rhetoric that is very similar to the very thing that to them 20 years ago was totally disqualifying for someone to be able to engage in national political office.
Yeah, I mean, look, the left, I mean, that's exactly right. And if you go just a few years before that, right after 9/11, the left would be, would say it's completely abnormal when you see these homegrown terrorists who start imbibing what ISIS or the Taliban, advocates, when we would see Americans doing that and, becoming radicalized. Even the left would say this is crazy. Now, I'm not so sure they would say that's crazy. Now, I'm not so sure that, there would be any reporting about this kind of stuff. And I think, Julie, to your point, you listening to Hakeem Jeffries, do they care about facts? I mean, we now know that the intelligence community IG during the first impeachment of President Trump, that their own protocols were violated in terms of accepting information from someone who we now know was not a whistleblower, was clearly biased. Where are the Democrats on that? They don't care about facts. And I think that's the problem, is the conversation about the news is no longer what's new, what's factual. It's, we have to kind of radicalize our audience. Washington Post after 2017, when Trump's inaugurated, we have a new tagline: democracy dies in darkness. This is, by the way, an anti-democratic president, anti-Republican president. He's a threat. You should treat him as such. You should treat that whole movement as a threat. And I think that's where we are now.
Yeah, look, I remember the days when there would be like this self-policing by the media, right? They would say something, but they'd say, we're not going to go into it because it's either too inflammatory or incendiary or what, even if it was true, right? And we were talking earlier about Norah O'Donnell and she's talking to the president. She's reading the manifesto from this guy.
Right.
And when you read the guy's exact words and the words that he used to describe the president, which I'm not going to use here, when she says it, you don't need to repeat it, because when you repeat it on national news, people are going to listen to it and be like, oh, that's the media. Like she doesn't, it's not like, and I quote blah, and she's conveying it in a way that's almost like it's okay, or they don't have any self-monitoring. There's no ability to say, look, he says things that are really inappropriate. I don't necessarily want to mention them on the air, but no, they repeat and they reinforce the negative because that's who they are.
And of course, they espouse some of the most ridiculous things you could ever imagine when it comes to ascribing motivation, right? I mean, Barack Obama personally posted over the weekend, we don't know the full motivation of what his actions. Like, this is like the standard line for anything. Anytime anything happens to somebody who is conservative leaning or just a normal American by a leftist agitator, that's their standard response. And they did the same thing after they went after they took out Charlie Kirk and killed him in cold blood. Some of the immediate responses were, well, we don't know the motive of the shooter.
It's almost whitewashing it.
I mean, it is. It is whitewashing it. And they're relying, again, to touch on something that we talked about with Mike Benz, on a kind of mindset amongst their base that they're never going to do their own research. They're never going to think, from a perspective of truth seeking and objectiveness, to say, well, are we sure we don't know the motivation of this guy? Because it seems like he probably just spelled it all out there. And in this context of this alleged shooter, the assassin of Charlie Kirk out in Utah, we're not sure what his ideology was. The more that the evidence is coming out in the case, and the more that the evidence came out even before the case, the more clear and abundantly clear and obvious that his motivations became known to everybody. And yet the left refuses to talk about those, just to protect their own tribe. I mean, is really what it comes down to.
Because it's politically inconvenient.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Or you have Jasmine Crockett and others saying, well, was this staged?
Right.
Like, seriously?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I just think that if there were actual legal consequences that could attach to some of the leading figures here, whether in the media, whether they're in politics or whatever, for imposing some kind of civil liability, Now, look, I know amongst conservatives, we're not fans of the plaintiff's bar. Okay, I get it. I'm not a fan of the plaintiff's bar, but there is a time and a place for consequences to be enacted. And the more that people can speak with impunity, without consequences, and say things like that and expect to get away with it. I mean, if someone calls me whatever name, horrible name that they could ever imagine, and if I can't go seek remedy against that person for an obvious, blatant, malicious falsehood, then they're just going to keep doing it because their side requires people to be irritated all the time. That's how they obtain power. Their entire movement relies upon their base believing that every single issue that's before them is the equivalent of the civil rights battles of the 1960s. Every single thing, and we've seen it time and again. And whether it's, racial equity issues, whether it's trans rights, whether it's anything in between, their whole mindset is on making other people out to be so evil that they can do this one thing to protect this one group, but it always only works in one direction. It's always further to the left, because that's the way that the left and the Marxists in the left have obtained power for centuries, and they keep running the same playbook, and we keep letting them get away with it.
I think that's totally insightful. If you think about, what are my rights as an American, you have to have some understanding of history, tradition, read something, think about something to understand what your rights are. And I think what the left wants is they want you to have your political views be completely based off emotion, completely based off visuals. Don't actually inform yourself. Be a low information voter and, make your votes based off your instincts from what you see. Don't try to educate yourself. And that's the easiest way to lose your rights as an American.
Right. And what you were talking about before is individual responsibility, right? Which is a big part of an AFL, or our mission at AFL. Right. You have an individual responsibility in whatever you're doing, whether it's in your work, whatever. And for those who don't exercise it, they should be held accountable. If you are irresponsible, if you do something unlawful, then you should be held accountable. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah,
That's what
I
we're
mean,
talking
it
about.
it is. And, look, I think, Dan, what you were just saying about the left and kind of their mindset and their view right now, a lot of it boils down to some real stereotypes about people. And so you'll hear this in the context of voter ID debates, right? Oh, some people just aren't capable of getting an ID because of, who they are or whatever. I mean, it just really demeaning view of other human beings, but they do it because it allows them to seize power or to use power, to exercise power more, which brings up an issue that actually is somewhat related here, which is the Supreme Court's decision in the Calais case versus Louisiana, which was great decision. I wish they would have gone a little bit further. I was a big fan of Justice Thomas's concurrence, which was a position that basically we asked the court to take as well. But let me just read the statute to you from Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And let's just talk about how this has been weaponized and used for decades and decades and decades to create districts not based on within a state, not based on any kind of political considerations, pure political considerations or objectivity or what's in the best interest of the state, but just playing on their view of a group of people so that they would boil things down to having districts that were sole minority blocks because of precisely how those people would vote. So here's this subsection A. No voting qualification or prerequisite to voting or standard practice or procedure shall be imposed or applied by any state or political subdivision in a manner which results in a denial or abridgment of the right of any citizen of the United States to vote on account of race or color, or in contravention of the guarantees set forth in Section 10303 F2 of this title as provided in subsection B. So you read the text. You read the text of that. And I think what the decision that we have today from the Supreme Court as opposed to the decisions yesterday and years prior as it pertains to the Voting Rights Act, is we have a court today that is actually reading the text of a statute. And they're not just rendering a decision that is compliant with some ulterior objective or some other motive or some kind of objective that's not rooted in the text of the statute or the Constitution. And so, here we saw the left being able to use something. When you look, again, just look at the words of that subsection A, and you read the words of the subsection A, and if you're just an objective person on the street, and it is kind of like what Jesse Waters used to do when he
the
was
man on
on
the
Sean
street.
Hannity's show, The Man on the
Jesse's
Street.
cool.
And if you just read that to somebody, and you said, okay, so what does this have to say about redistricting? People would be dumbfounded. Probably nothing. But yet it was used by the left and weaponized by the left to achieve their objectives. And again, done so through the lens of racial justice, of course, because, again, their worldview requires them to try to play out these emotions and try to continually use the perception that there is an oppressed class that the Republicans or that the conservatives are repressing, and that only the Democrats are the saviors. And so in response, I mean, you saw this in the lead up to this case. You'll see it in the follow up to it. I'm confident that the Democrats in the Senate and in the House and across the country are going to run around and talk about how this is a horrible decision for minorities in America, when really all it is we're just going to make districts based on how people vote, not based on the color of their skin.
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, Gene, I think that hits the nail on the head. Last week, you saw, you saw Senator Padilla say, this, President Trump's executive order on voting integrity with mail-in ballots. I've introduced legislation to undo that. The things where, they want majority, minority districts. It is all about Americans, particularly minority Americans, are victims and they don't know what's good for them. So we need to use the courts. We need to use the law to essentially protect them because they don't know how to think for themselves. They are, we need them continually to be the underclass that we say they are. We don't want, economic opportunities other than what the government subsidizes. It is the worst form of discrimination. It is the biggest threat to actually true equality in this country. And they don't want equality. They don't want equality under the law. They want discriminatory effects jurisprudence, not discriminatory intent, which is what you saw in Kagan's dissent in the Calais case. And I think it's what's holding America back. And I think that's why a lot of people, I look at my own community in South Florida. South Florida used to lean left. I think people are waking up, and people walk up to me and say, when I wear my America First legal sweatshirt, they're like, oh my God, you guys are actually serious about equality. You're serious about the law. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, and we got good swag too to go.
Yeah.
But it comes down to one thing, doesn't it? Power. It's all about power. No matter what venue you're in, they want power because power means everything. Power means control in their schools. It means control of the people. It means control of voting. Every single thing, it comes down to power.
And
They have
anything to keep it,
right.
basically.
Take it, keep it.
Right.
The ends do justify the means.
Do y'all remember, and this was especially during COVID, there was this cartoon image when they were really trying to advance concepts of equity, right? And it showed some kids looking over a baseball field, and there's a few different panels in this cartoon, and one of them was tall, one of them was short, and one of them was medium, and it was this is whatever. And then equity, they represented, like, they gave a kid a stool to stand upon, right, to look over the fence and to be able to see the game. And I'm sure we can find a version of this cartoon to put up here for folks. But really, as nice, oh wow, let's just help the little guy, let's help this little thing here. We know that the way that the left has exercised power, every time it gets power across human history, especially recent human history over the last several centuries in the West, What they really should have shown on that cartoon was the police, the state, coming up to the tall kid with a chainsaw and cutting him off at his knees to make him shorter so that he would be the same as the other kid. That's actually what they're going for. That's what their policies mandate. They're not trying to give that kid a boost. They're trying to cut down the other people because that enhances their ability to exercise that power that you're talking about, to control people, to make them complicit, to make them docile. And, viewing other Americans, as you said, Dan, as who are minorities or who come from different backgrounds, as being completely incapable of doing anything unless the government's helping them is one of the most demeaning things that you could ever imagine. I mean, it's absolutely dehumanizing. Why can't someone get an ID because of the color of their skin? Why? It's complete ridiculousness. And if you go into any of these communities and you talk to people who live in communities that have higher minority populations, everyone knows how to get an ID. Nobody doesn't know how to get an ID.
They're insulted like that. Yeah. This guy, I think his name is Ami on the street or whatever. He goes into Harlem when this whole thing. He's like, "Hey, do you have an ID?" And the people are like, "What do you mean? Do I have an ID?" Like, of course I have an ID.
Yeah.
You can't do anything without an ID. You can't check into a hotel, forget TSA, anything. So to say, "Sorry, Dan, you're too stupid."
Right.
Only the government can. It's like the whole married woman thing. We talked about this a couple of podcasts ago. Like, I don't know. I'm able to get an ID and I'm married. Like, I think I could figure it out. It's insanity.
Yeah. So another issue that has been coming up in our work that we've talked about in different shows already has been related to this, is the role of the left when it comes to parents and families, and the left trying to use institutions of government to substitute for families. Now, I'll give you my hypothesis, and I invite you all to critique it here for everybody at home. I guess you don't get to critique it live, but you can send us your feedback and tell the team here what an idiot I am. But if you look at birth rates for conservative-leaning Americans and normal-leaning Americans compared to birth rates for families that are more liberal-leaning, you can look at it, and the liberals are basically depopulating themselves from society over the generations. The conservatives, on the other hand, are having more children. And so, all things being equal, you're going to end up with a situation where there are a lot more conservative-leaning people. Everyone knows every family has a couple of, people who go astray. They go to college. They, maybe you lose one or two here or there. But in the grand scheme of things, the situation is that they would remove themselves from power if left unchecked. And so what they have to do is they have to seize and use the institutions like the schools, like the government, to interfere with that relationship with the parents, between the parents and the child, to be able to interject and to poison their their minds with this toxic ideology. Which is why I think one of the things that, our parent and student toolkit that we have on our website is really helpful, is because at least in the past, Congress recognized that parents had these rights, and they were able to pass laws like the IDEA and others that give, or FERPA, or other things that gave parents direct rights about the education of their kids across the country. So with that said, that's my hypothesis, is that the left knows that they are demographically doomed. That's my new phrase. The left is demographically doomed forever. So the only thing that they can do, number one, is seize on your kids, seize on the family relationship, and use something there to try to inject their minds with the woke mind virus, toxic ideology, or to add in people from across the world who don't share the same common belief system, which encourages mass migration of all types into the country. So that's my hypothesis. Destroy it.
That's
I think destroy on that. Go ahead.
it's insightful. I think about Plato's Republic, which is it's an allegory for what happens when you have elites run society, and one of those things is Plato advocated, or the kind of supposed Plato advocated, the communism of women and children, So in other words, get rid of parents, have the state raise children, and they're all going to believe the same thing, and they're all going to allow philosophers to run society. And that's exactly what we're seeing today. I think that's exactly right. Why worry about demographics and having the traditional family when the state is the mother? And it's absolutely crazy. I think that's absolutely right. It's scary. You don't want to think about that. But
No, but
true.
that's why we concentrate on it so much at AFL, right? Because people can relate to the fact that these are my kids. Like you're trying to take my kids. You're basically saying, school door opens, bye-bye, mom, bye-bye, dad, we're in charge. And when they get them, the kids are at school how many hours in a day versus when they're home, even if they're like home for dinner and whatever, the school has your kids for the majority of their day in and day out. So this is like, for them, this is like the perfect environment to take their minds and to say, there goes the value system. Because if you don't have this nuclear family to balance out these crazy thoughts, if you don't have, and then you can also inject you don't want faith either, because like faith is an important anecdote to the craziness on the left. Then you got government. Then you, again, back to that power.
But Julie, remember, right? We saw something. AFL exposed this. What happens when parents speak out? Look at the Garland memo.
Yep.
Yeah.
The Garland memo, which again, we, not to toot our horn, but why not? That was exposed by AFL to be called a domestic terrorist by the Attorney General of the United States.
Yeah, we uncovered that it wasn't just Biden's FBI being sicked on concerned parents at school board meetings, but that they were also working with the Biden White House to coordinate all of it behind the scenes.
Yeah, but it really was the kind of the perfect storm for the left of parents speaking out, and especially in Loudoun County, which was kind of the epicenter. But there's just something that's taking place across the country, and they followed the typical pattern of the left, which is to create an artificial problem, right? And so there was this artificial problem of parents being violent and threatening school board members, which, if was an issue, would be dealt with by local police all across the country. Deal with things like that all the time. And instead, they decide to weaponize the entire Department of Justice against people. And it's not that they know that there's no epidemic in violence. And they know that there's not actually going to be a significant deployment of resources by the Department of Justice to go after them. There were some documented instances. But the whole point is to have a chilling effect, to make sure that parents don't speak out. And so that your parents, if you walk into your kid's classroom on day 1 of 3rd grade and you look and you see the teacher, and it's very clearly a man who thinks he's a woman, you're going to let your kids be in there? And not, their worldview is, yes, you are. And you're not going to say a damn thing about it, because if you complain, you're a bigot. You're a bigot, and you better not protest at the school board, because if you do, we're going to sick the FBI on you.
Right.
It's insane.
And remember how they created this? It's called a FACA, right? The Federal Advisory Committee, and they were like, "Oh, we're just getting real American mom and dads to advise the Department of Justice," except everybody. It was not properly convened in accordance with federal law, and like, how many conservatives were on the
Zero.
We're on that 0. Again, we got that dismantled, but we had to be so on every single second. And as a parent, I tell this to my friends, my kids are older, but like every single day, you better check your kids' homework. You better go through that backpack, because it's not them. Like, you may have the greatest of kids, but look what they're up against. I mean, this is a bureaucracy it's a behemoth, and you better be aware.
And to bring it full circle, recent news, we now know who was advising Biden's DOJ on who to target as hate groups or threats. It was the SPLC.
Yeah, it's, look, it's, in my opinion, the left has this playbook of developing these artificial enemies, right? And they build them up, these kind of paper tigers, and that are there, and they're supposed to be really super scary. And then actually, at the end of the day, they know that they're not, but they inflame and so incite their base at the mere thought of this, that it inspires them to action, and they know that it's going to result in people like in situations like what we had on Saturday. So let's transition now into our favorite segment of this show, which is the bad legal takes. Let's get started.
From viral bad arguments to headline mistakes, we're calling them out on bad legal takes.
Today's bad legal take is brought to you by our very own Julie Strauss. So Julie, what you got?
Okay, so this whole conversation was like a perfect segue to this bad legal take, which I've been watching for weeks on end. So in January or so, a Democrat delegate from Northern Virginia by the name of Dan Helmer introduced in the Virginia General Assembly a bill regarding January 6, 2021. And his bill basically says that public schools in Virginia, K through 12, if they're going to have any instruction with respect to January 6th, there's certain terminology that can be used, must be used, and that shall not be used. Literally, the bill said shall and shall not. So January 6th shall be referred to as an insurrection, shall not be referred to as a peaceful gathering or protest, and that there shall not be any conversation about whether the gathering was due to a claim of election fraud. So this bill,
So you have the 10 commandments now in schools.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Thou shalt not. So you shall call it an insurrection. So the bill gets passed all by Democrats, no Republican vote, goes to Spanberger. And I mean, I have my opinion about whether she was ready to sign or not, but she ends up getting pressure from a group that really doesn't want her to sign, not because they're with us and believe in this sort of, critical thinking that should happen in schools, but because they're more of the ilk of all these LBGT, whatever books in kindergarten nothing should be out, right? So they kind of, in their letter to her, they basically said, look, we agree, like it is an insurrection, I'm paraphrasing, but this isn't the way to do it. Again, paraphrasing, but that was the message. So instead, she's turned this over to the Board of Education to review it. So we all know what's going to happen. They're going to do this. This is what's going to happen in schools, but it's just not going to be codified into law. But what do you guys think about the fact that this kind of conversation, a bill is introduced saying what can and cannot be taught? And there cannot be conversation. Like there can't even be, I think the bill said there can't even be a suggestion. How do you think about it? Is that insanity?
Telling people that what you can and cannot talk about in an educational environment seems to implicate a few big principles that the left usually claims to care very deeply about. Freedom of speech, of course, being amongst them. Freedom of thought. Freedom to just be left alone. Quite frankly, and so many other issues the compulsion that's at issue here. And look, there's a difference between compelling somebody to learn algebra, right? Compelling teaching a trigonometry or whatever, versus on an issue like this, saying that there is to be no debate, there is to be no discussion, there is to be no disagreement with the stated view of the state about this particular subject. Seems to me to be something that's very, very wrong and illegal.
Yeah, because it doesn't even, this goes to the earlier discussion. It doesn't even want students to have a debate on the issues. It's just black or white. And, we're not going to allow you to even understand and debate, these questions. We're just going to ban certain speech.
Yeah. Well, that was a fun one. We'll see what happens with that one, but it seems like it's something that could be ripe for legal challenge at some point in the future if, in fact, it does get signed into law. So we'll see.
We are going to pay attention.
We will be closely following it, yes, as they say. So look, we could get into more, but I think we're out of time for today. If you have a question, or if you have a comment, or if you have a suggestion, please contact us at thearena@aflegal.org. Send us a note. We'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, to my colleagues, Thanks for a great discussion. We here do not get depressed. We do not despair. We do not get sad about the state of affairs. We are here to fight, defend, and save. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.